Hey, I'm back. I've not much has happened to me in this past few weeks. First, mainly because some of you probably already know that Brisbane had massive flooding. So for a few weeks, I just couldn't ride my bike. And when the floodwaters dried up, it left like dust everywhere. And because of the dust, I suffered from severe sinusitis. So I was sick for like 3 weeks. Um, so yeah, not much happened to me. With my sinusitis, I couldn't breathe properly, and so I couldn't talk. But now I'm back. So in my previous video, I discussed about why climbing is so much harder than riding on the flats. Um, so in that video, I also mentioned that for you to climb, you need to concentrate on turning the wheel, right? Turning the cranks. Just keep turning, concentrate on turning the crank to generate power and so on. Now, if you ask the climbers and the really strong climbers, if you ask them, what's the ideal cadence? And a lot of them would actually tell you, you need to be pedaling between 90 to 100 RPM. Like look at Lance Armstrong, look at Chris Froome. They're like spinning really fast, like you know between 90 to 100 RPM. Now in this video, we'll have a look at whether 90 to 100 RPM actually works when you're climbing. Let's look at it in a scientific way. Let's see if that's even achievable. All right, the moment of truth. So let's have a look at a 90 to 100 RPM cadence, and assuming that you have a compact crank which has a 34 small chainring in front, or a semi-compact which has a 36. Now, most bikes come with an 11 to 28 cassette at the back, because to get to a 32, you will need a medium cage derailleur. So a 32 isn't really possible most of the time. So you're stuck with a 28. That's the smallest cog. So supposing that you have a compact crank, 34 and then 28 at the back. If you pedal at 90 RPM, your speed would be around 13.79 kilometers per hour. Right? So now if we look at how much power you're generating to produce 13.79 kilometers per hour, say if you only weigh 70 kilos, which is quite a light rider, and then your bike only weighs 7 kilos, which is really just a little bit over the UCI limit of 6.8 kilos. This is a very light bike. 7 kilos means you probably aren't carrying any tools or water bottles and so on. Now, supposing you're climbing a 10% gradient, which is serious, right? Over a distance of 2 kilometers. Coming here, 13.79% at 9 kilometers per hour when you're doing it at 90 RPM on a compact crank. We plug that in here and see how much power you need to generate. Holy crap, 333 watts. To climb a gradient of 10%, you need to generate 333 watts. If you are using a semi-compact crank, which gives you 14.71 kilometers per hour at 90 RPM, plug that in here, and you would have to generate 357 watts up a 10% gradient. Us mere mortals, that's not achievable. You need to be a really, really strong rider to generate that much power. For the pros, that's easy, because the pros They can do like 400 to 450 watts for an hour. Chris Froome can do that, certainly. But 357 watts, even for an amateur cyclist, you need to be a really strong amateur cyclist to generate 357 watts, even with a compact crank. Right? Now, it's a different story when you're just climbing a 5% gradient and at 14.71 kilometers per hour, you only need to generate not even like 200 watts, 195. It means that 90 RPM up a 5% gradient is very much achievable. But once you start climbing serious mountains, serious hills, once the gradient starts hitting 10%, right, to generate 14.71 kilometers per hour, 357 watts, that's not possible. Right? The pros, no problems. But us mere mortals, this is not achievable. So if you purely look at the numbers, pedaling at 90 to 100 RPM with a compact 34 and a 28 at the back, or even a 32 at the back, or even worse, if you have a semi-compact with a 36 in front and 28 at the back, trying to spin 90 RPM on a steep climb, like even a 10% gradient, you'd have to generate like 350 watts. You need to generate 350 watts. If you only weigh 70 kilos and your bike only weighs 7 kilos. Us, mere mortals, that's not achievable. So next time when you're climbing, stop thinking about, hey, I need to be pedaling at 90 RPM. Oh no, my cadence has dropped to 70. I'm doing it the wrong way. No, you're not. You need to be pedaling at a cadence that you could sustain to finish the climb, right? I've had climbs where I could barely sustain 50 RPM for 45 minutes. It was so steep. The climb is like 5Ks, but then average is like, what, close to 11? Something like that. This was up Northbrook towards Mount Glorious. 46 minutes of barely 50 RPM average, and my heart rate was off like through the roof. Right? But I survived. If I was thinking, oh, I need to be pedaling at 90 RPM, I'd be dead. I won't even last like 500 meters in that very steep climb. Like the first 2.4 kilometers of that climb was averages 13%. There's no way in hell would I be able to climb it if I followed the expert advice of pedaling between 90 to 100 RPM. And I have a compact crank, 34 in front, and I have a 32 cog at the back. And I could barely spin 50 RPM. But I survived. Right? Stop thinking about 90 RPM. It doesn't work. You need to be really, really strong to pedal at 90 RPM on a steep climb. Right? If it's only 5%, that's easy. 5%, I would even climb it on the big ring. I won't even shift to the small ring. But in a serious climb, good luck with 90 RPM. So next time when you're climbing, just concentrate on turning the cranks. Forget about cadence. Right? Spin in the cadence that's most comfortable to you. Alright, until next time.